Good evening, Holliston, and welcome to the July 19th, 2021 Select Board meeting. We're going to start this evening at 6:30, going immediately into executive session with the plan to return to open meeting at 7 p.m. So I'm going to call for a roll call vote to enter into executive session, and then the mics will go down and the camera will go down, and we will rejoin you approximately at 7 p.m. So for the purposes of reasons 2 and 3, non-union personnel and collective bargaining, the select board will now enter into executive session at 6:30 p.m. with a roll call vote starting with John Cronin.
I'll make a motion on joining into executive session.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, now roll call vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, that's my line.
Tina and I. So we'll see you around 7 p.m. Thank you. Good evening, Holliston. Thank you for waiting for us. It's 7:08, and we are going to open the public meeting tonight for the select board. Again, it's July 19th, 2021, and we're going to start right out of the gate with an award. We have Chief Stone in the room here. He's going to come join us at the table, please. And he is going to introduce 4 officers, a sergeant and 3 officers, a sergeant, a detective, and 2 officers who were awarded the Police Life-Saving Award in June.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So on June 14th, we had a medical emergency call in front of the police station. The 4 officers working that night, Sergeant Belson, Detective Avey, Officer Parent, and Officer Loftus, responded right up front. There was a person in the backseat of the car who was passed out, not breathing. They were able to get the male party out of the car, render first aid to him, ended up administering 2 doses of 4 milligram naloxone to them. He then came about, was transported to a local hospital, and to our knowledge, survived the incident because of our quick action. So as a result, last week during roll call, all 4 of the officers were presented with our Department Life-Saving Award, and we're represented as such. So very proud of them.
All right, thank you. And I believe we have the letter to read for the award. We have the award to read, I should say. All right, so
Proceed.
yes, please, John, if you can.
So letters to Detective Christopher Avey, Sergeant Belson, Officer Loftus, and Officer Parent. As Chief Stone just indicated, I'll read the event an emergency call in the evening of June 14, 2021. These officers responded to a possible overdose call in front of the parking lot of the police station. Upon arrival, they were directed to a male party who was slumped over in the back seat of a vehicle. They immediately assisted the male party out of the car, placed him onto the ground. At this time, the victim had a slight pulse, was experiencing shallow breathing. Based on training and experience, the officers knew the man was experiencing a narcotic overdose and immediately administered a single 4 milligram dose of naloxone Narcan. After seeing no noticeable effect, the automated external defibrillator was connected. A second 4 milligram dose of Narcan was administered to the victim, and rescue breathing was initiated. A total of 3 rounds of CPR were completed before the victim became responsive and was able to be moved to the recovery position. As the Holliston ambulance prepared the patient for transport, he appeared to have regained full consciousness. That is the report of the incident on June 14, 2021.
All right.
When I presented the award, I thought it was interesting. One of the officers said, this is what we just do every day. And to them, it's not a big deal. And it was presented to them in front of the other colleagues and police officers who also do that every single day. But I think it's important to know, for the board to know, and for the public to know that this, our officers go above and beyond every day. And this is just one of many incidents. If I gave awards, I'd be here every week. But I thought it was important to know, and they did a great job that night. So well deserving.
Well, Chief Stone, if I can, I mean, Ben, I don't know, or John, if you want to add any comments, but what I was really struck by was the date here. It was June 14th, 2021. We were still in a state of emergency. And I think of the fact that they engaged in the way that they did, giving CPR, rescue breathing, with a complete stranger to them, showed an enormous amount of bravery. We were still in the state of emergency. It had not ended, and I think took that call to a higher level, given the concerns of exposure and so on. So I would agree with you that this was a tremendous act of bravery and good service to the community.
I think the only thing I would say is, on behalf of, for myself speaking, that, we're grateful to have folks like these officers, patrolling our streets every day. Your every day is sometimes the hardest day for someone else. So, we appreciate the hard work and the challenge that you undergo to handle these situations, and it is, it's a lot, and we're very appreciative. And so thank you to these officers for doing what they do every day, and in this case, saving a life.
Thank you.
Outstanding work, just the very best of policing, so congratulations to you on having such a great police force and officers that are well-trained and ready to respond.
I just presented, they do it. They do all the work.
Understood. Thank you, Chief.
Chief, would you mind staying at the table?
Sure.
We're going to go out of order. We're going to move on to the comments of the town administrator. We have, Travis, you have some updates to provide that Chief Stone would like to perhaps have your input on or comments on.
Yeah, so the first one that I would have mentioned under comments of the town administrator was the successful blood drive, but obviously the chief can fill us in on that, how that came to be and how successful it was.
Yeah, so this is the second time we've done it at HPD. We tried doing it last summer, but obviously because of COVID, they restricted and closed a lot of the blood drives down. We have a connection with Children's Hospital through one of our officers has benefited greatly from Children's Hospital. So we reached out again at the end of last summer. We pushed it to the fall and was hoping maybe in the winter. Obviously, we couldn't do that. And then finally this spring, we were able to lock in a date for the summer. Originally scheduled it for 24. They closed the numbers down because of the COVID restrictions. It filled up within 2 days, so the woman from Children's Hospital said, why don't we add 12 more? We added 12 more and we filled that. I didn't think we ended up at 37. I think we took one walk-in. So very little effort on our part. Boston Children's Hospital did all the work. They set everything up. It's something we'll probably make an annual event.
Did they come up with a mobile unit?
They did, yeah. They parked right in front of our police station.
Thank you for doing that.
Great. And then while we have the chief, although he can get out of frame if you'd like, we did receive the official word today from Mass DOT on our heavy commercial vehicle exclusion request. They are approving the heavy commercial vehicle exclusion request for South Street / Clark Street. South Street being in Holliston, Clark Street being in Medway. They are approving Bullard Street. They're approving Locust Street, and they're approving High Street. Anybody who's seen High knows that the signs are up there. It was always just a paper. It is now official. So those are the four that they have at this point, based on our request, issued approvals for. They have requested that we send something indicating that we'll be putting it in our traffic rules and orders. And I have that in front of the clerk of the board. And then obviously, I think, we've discussed that there are some steps we've taken. We've certainly learned this process through the Woodland example. And that, there's going to be quite a bit of education before enforcement starts. And we will be working with DPW and HPD as we did last time to get these up and running. But a lot of feedback we got from the community on South Street specifically, including the others as well. So very, very happy that Mass DOT saw the merits of these requests.
So you would like the board to make a motion to include these 4 now permitted heavy commercial vehicle exclusions into the traffic rules and orders?
We must put them in the traffic rules and orders to get the permit number.
That's
That
right.
is that is the way that the process works. So there are 3 copies that you'll need to sign, so I can give them 3 originals, and then there's a motion for the clerk to read that we'll have in the minutes as well.
Okay, so Chief will go ahead and do that. And then if you just want to speak, as you did with Woodland Street, about the process moving forward.
I have a question. When we put the application in the MassDOT, I believe there were additional streets. Can you give us an update on those streets?
Sure. So those are not rejected. They're not recommended for approval. And so the process was District 3, which is the district that we're in with Mass DOT, the meetings with the DOT employees who came out with Rep. Dykema and Senator Spoka's office and us and looked at these roads. District 3 looked at that application and recommended the ones that I listed this evening. They are not saying no forever to the other requests, but at this time they are not recommending it. Part of their reasoning on some of their requests was related to the fact that they feel Woodland, when implemented fully, will address some of the concerns and therefore are not necessary. I think we will have the time to evaluate this through a number of things that TAC has at its disposal, and HPD can give us feedback on. And if we feel that, no, it is absolutely necessary, then we can certainly circle back.
What streets were those?
Railroad, and Fisk, I
And
believe.
Lowland.
And Lowland, we had asked for the 7 PM to 7 AM portion of Lowland to be extended to all of Lowland for 24 hours. And they indicated that based on the change to Woodland and the 7 to 7, they felt that that was adequate.
Do you, I don't want to put you on the spot, do you recall what the traffic engineer's report said about those particular streets with respect to traffic counts? I can't remember, I can look it up, but do you remember if they were compelling numbers or were they borderline? Do you remember?
I would say, based on the report, Fisk was always going to be the hardest to prove out. I think Lowland is just surprising only because there's already a 7 to 7. And I think the numbers had supported it, but I think, their reasoning that all of these other changes will impact it and we should look at that before coming back to them makes sense. I think South was always the most compelling of all of our applications.
Thank you.
Okay, so entertain a motion. John?
So I can make a motion, Travis. I can make it very simple, or I could read one of the letters. What do you recommend?
I shot you an email with an example, if you'd like to look at that, or I can pull it up as well.
So I'll make a motion to adopt the town's traffic rules and orders into the town's traffic rules and orders, the heavy commercial vehicle exclusion as authorized by Mass DOT for South Street, Bullitt Street, High Street, and Locust Street for 24-hour, 2.5-ton HCVE exclusion.
A motion, do we have a second?
You have a second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Travis, quick question, Medway will also need to adopt this into their traffic rules and regulations in order for South Street, Clark Street to have that permit, or is it just Holliston that needs to take that step?
So to access that road, yes, they will, and they are very excited to do so. And so part of the South Street, Clark Street component that we did not have on the Woodland, for example, or the other ones, is that obviously HPD will work with Medway PD, and they were with us when Mass DOT was out there on South Street with us. So I will coordinate with Medway.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so Chief, if you were prepared tonight, I'm not sure if this is new news for you or you had a heads up that the HCBEs were approved, but if you had the heads up and are prepared tonight, could you just speak a little bit about how the process next, or what the next steps are for?
I may have been tipped off, yes. Early in the day. In terms of preparation, I think the town administrator hit right on the head. I think, similar with how we've been doing with Woodland Street, it's going to be a phased approach. It's going to have to be first starting with education, teaching drivers, particularly the commercial vehicle drivers, what roads can be used, what they can't be used. While being in contact with Chief Tingley over Medway. Medway's been on board since the beginning. It's going to be a joint effort through Medway. Whether you're leaving Holliston or coming into Holliston, you have to access either Clark Street or South Street. So it has to be a team effort in that approach. And like the town administrator said, they've been on board from the beginning. So that should be something that we welcome and they welcome. But continue to educate drivers and then get to the enforcement part of it. We have, I believe, both signboards still being utilized down Woodland Street from TAC. So those can be deployed and changed remotely at any time. We'll be in contact with our traffic safety unit. We'll go down and talk signage, where signage can go. The signage that was placed on Woodland Street was done with our traffic safety unit. Lieutenant Lorraine, DPW, talked about strategically where they would be most effective, where they, sight lines, what can be seen. So that all of those similar steps will take place on these 4 roads.
Would Medway have, I imagine they have a message board where we have 2, I'm wondering if Medway possibly could deploy theirs if it's not already in use. If that's-
Sure, yeah, so that'll probably be part of the education part of it, up towards the 109 end, towards
Yeah.
the Chinese food restaurant there. Before people are turning onto the, so similar with us, we don't want to have people, get to Rockland Street and say, oh, really, I didn't realize this was South Street. So we'll probably do it more towards Route 16 before you get on to South Street.
Okay, and then Travis, could I just ask you to loop back with Sean Reese, because the Traffic Advisory Committee had discussed when we had the South Street petitioner group put forward their concerns. This HCVE application was part of what we supported as a recommendation to the board. There was another piece to it, which was DOT approving. They were gonna come in and put a green sign up on, one of their official signs up on Washington Street 16 heading west that was going to say truck route this way. I haven't seen the sign, but that was something that Sean was going to coordinate with DOT. This seems like a perfect complement to the change that we're about to
So
put in place.
I had seen that as well, and I was excited because Lori Shattuck from DOT indicated that DOT would pay for those signs. And so my understanding was that that was in place. If they're not up yet, she will be involved in the process of finalizing this, and I will make sure that that's
Okay.
done in conjunction.
You probably don't have to update Lori that there's now an HCVE in place and she's.
No.
She's the one who
That was my
contacted.
understanding as well, too, that it's either done or the signs have been made. Lori's been a great help with Mass DOT, so.
Okay, all right. So Travis, I'm not sure what else you have in your town
A few
administrator.
others, but they don't include the chief, so. I can
Okay,
get
so would you like to
that.
come back to that? We'll put it back on number
Sure.
7. Okay, so we'll let the chief go and we'll move on regularly with our agenda, which would be the CARES Act ARPA programmatic update. And then we'll come back to the update from the town administrator. Chief, thank you very much for
Thank you
coming
very
in and
much. Thank you, Chief.
congratulations again for
Thank
your
you.
office.
Thanks, Chief.
Thank you.
Good night. All right, so we're gonna move on to CARES Act ARPA programmatic update, and we're gonna invite chief number 2, just by order, that's all. Come on up to the table, please.
He tagged out, I tagged in,
That's right.
worked very collaboratively together.
How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Nice to see you.
It's nice to be here after a week off when I was meeting with my command staff, so it's nice to be back at the table. So following the board's vote 2 weeks ago, as we're trying to be very intentional about spending down the CARES balance, we continue to track ongoing expenditures plus what has already been obligated. We're now spanning 3 separate fiscal years because when the CARES funding was appropriated and when it was approved, it retroactively covered expenses that happened in the last couple of months of fiscal year 20, that we've been using it for most of fiscal year 21, and now we're starting to have expenses that are being posted to fiscal year 22 against our CARES balance. A question had been raised about where has the money gone. That was part of what I had regularly been updating the board, as well as what's been going out in the weekly reports that I've been posting on the website. But there had been a question about, more 10,000-foot view of what does this look like. So the town administrator had prepared a graphic that used larger roll-up summary categories than what I had been using.
Okay.
Mine are based on Treasury and DLS reporting requirements. These are more holistic, big picture bundles. So this would be an explanation for where the money has gone, where it's been spent and or obligated. So
The only trick with this, I'll say, is obviously within schools, some of the component would be technology, right? So all information technology is really, to say on the town side, the telework, remote participation, internet connection, the direct COVID response, the disinfecting public buildings for both service for the cleaning staff, and then also the equipment that we purchased to be able to do it ourselves, the PPE that Chief answers consistently on where we stand, the social distancing measures, which you can find in town hall in front of all these offices, which will remain in place, and the communications, all staffing needs. Again, IT part-time is part of that, but this is how I grouped it for ease. The Board of Health clerical hours, the crossing guard hours, and then sick leave was a significant component. For direct resident support, grouping both the grocery and meal delivery, which was substantial, and also the rent and mortgage relief, which was well discussed in 3 phases. All of that final reporting has been issued with the accountant, so we can discuss that when the auditors are in, but I think that worked out very well. The direct school support is really beyond the ESSER 1, 2 and what's coming for ESSER 3. If you look at it, it's really the two main items that the select board took up, which was in the very beginning, I think before I started, on the Chromebook request that they had, and then most recently on the sizable request that Chief Cassidy did heroic accounting work to make sure we could help as much as possible, and the board supported. And then finally, the direct Board of Health support, which was the SAM and VNA, for the most part, public health surveillance in general. So again, the actual accounting and the way that we report it out for DLS is the tracking that the chief has been giving you all along. This is really just an attempt for when people say, what did you do with the 1.3 million? This is how it was allocated in buckets that I think people are more accustomed with looking at.
I think this is great. I had some comments, but I'll turn to John and then to Ben.
I have one question. Can you, my memory's foggy on the status of the unemployment piece. I remember early on, back in January, this was a huge cost as fraudulent claims were coming in. We put aside some money to tackle those, and then it kind of waned as unemployment fraud kind of got controlled. What does the 10% unemployment reflect? The actual or projected assignment of costs against those? And I guess the question I'm asking is some portion of that 10% likely to be released back to the unallocated pool of cares once we reconcile unemployment?
So at the end of FY21, you actually did take a vote. Obviously, you recall it was not long ago to reverse out some of what had originally been allocated for it. So what happened was in the very beginning, there was a substantial amount of fraudulent claims, not specific to Holliston, specific to all municipalities, all employers. It took the federal and state governments quite a while to get that under control, but they have now, to which point what we started seeing was credits back on our bills. And so while we did actually see valid unemployment tick up slightly for changes, in some programming, the majority of the expense was related to the fraudulent charges, which then ticked off over time, and so it sort of balanced out. To not have an issue fiscal year over year, we took the action that we did, which was to reverse out a portion of what the board had previously approved. But at this point, we're now in the next fiscal year, and I think that where we are for the FY22 budget is the right place to be. I don't see a substantial number of other claims coming off of our monthly billing. And actually, there have been changes made at the unemployment level since ARPA, where employers, including the town, if we lay anybody off or we let anybody go, actually after April take on an even larger portion hit through unemployment. So you're correct that action was taken, and what we initially saw as a giant wave did begin to wane because they started to address the fraudulent claims. I think the action we took at the end of FY21 was the right one. I think we're in good position for FY22.
So we don't see any release of those encumbered funds for the unemployment for 21 coming back. We're square. We've reconciled.
I believe we have.
Okay, thank you. Good.
Okay.
Yep.
I just have the comment that this is a nice, good, easy, clean way to see it. And I think the only thing I would probably say is, as we look at these numbers and look at these buckets, thinking about how we want to consider ARPA funds if we are planning ahead, like what kinds of needs we might have, so we can sort of make sure that we have the right allocations in the right buckets in the right places. So if, knock on wood, nothing happens, but if something does come back, we need to use those funds to help a seventh wave or whatever we're on now. We're ready.
And the good thing is that this just represents the CARES spending. There were other funding sources. Board of Health had access to certain funds for surveillance. I had access to FEMA funds and to state programs for PPE to supplement what we were purchasing. And obviously the schools with the ESSER funding. So this just represents CARES. So when we look holistically to sort of project out how much should we keep aside for possible ARPA spending for
those other additional.
We just need to remember that this isn't all in, this was just one specific program.
Absolutely, no, that's a good point, that's a great point, thank you. Thank you very much for doing this.
Yeah, definitely wanted to thank you and Travis for preparing this. I think this looks great. So my question is, who's going to distribute this? Because this seems like a really good graphic for any department in town to use in any publication that they have. So a newsletter or an email blast to let residents know from any one particular department or many departments how CARES Act funds were used. I'm struck by how significant the needs were in Holliston. These are not small areas, these are huge areas. And the fact that, you look at information and technology, that allowed us to keep open meetings and keep remote participation going and allow the work of municipal government to continue. And we are somewhat unique from what I understand how other communities were able to continue to do that. So I'm just so impressed by how great the need was in Holliston and how well the $1.3 million was used. So my question is, does this go out to department heads for them to use if they want in their publications, newsletters, emails, and so on, to educate the community about just how much of a need there was in Holliston? Because I do think we're going to pivot to ARPA, and my sense is that there's already a lot of community discussion. We've actually reached out to the community and asked for their input. So I think it's good as a baseline to say, hey, look, there was a significant impact. Here's where it was felt, and give people that baseline as we start to talk about ARPA. So is there a plan for department heads to have access to this? I know you're sharing it with us. I imagine we're not the only ones who get to see this or the people on this meeting tonight. What is the next step for this graph?
Well, the next step is I made the type so large on the right that it knocked off unemployment and solid waste. So I'm going to fix that.
Okay.
Then we will put it on the website, and I
Okay.
can certainly send it out. And I believe, as always, our friends at the Holliston Reporter will pick this up as well. So I will certainly make sure it gets out there.
Okay.
And as part of our public messaging, and I agree with you that the departments, boards, committees, groups have a lot to celebrate. And
Yeah.
these do not just represent buckets. When you look at something like rent mortgage relief,
Yeah.
Youth and Family Service and the Community Action Fund can give
Yeah.
an even more detailed explanation of,
I agree.
we as a community helped X number of families stay in their homes. And we know that that has a ripple effect, because when you've addressed the insecurity of where someone's going to stay, and other groups were addressing food insecurity, but that allows students to learn better. Studies show that when students don't have that anxiety about where they're going to rest their head at night and where they're going to get food from, it allows them to be in a better frame of mind to be able to learn. So there's a ripple effect, and although they're nice and neat in these buckets, there's a lot of overlap, and one benefits another program at the same time, which is why, again, as we transition to ARPA, we're now focusing a lot more on recovery and not just response, because we want to make sure that the foundation that has been laid with CARES, we now maximize that potential with ARPA to really launch the community to the next level and make sure as many groups and individuals as possible can recover truly from the effects of the pandemic.
I agree. I mean, I'm seeing this like in the senior center newsletter, where the senior center can then do a write-up on how they benefit from the CARES Act, and you've got this wonderful graphic. So I think it's great. I appreciate that you did the work. Because a good visual, as Ben will say, goes a long way. All right, so I think that's it for the CARES.
That's it for CARES, which is a natural segue, unless anyone else has something to talk about.
I've lost the ability to tell, and I do not see Chris over there to indicate to me whether or not there's anybody on the call who'd like to ask you a question about the CARES Act.
We'll need to set up some sort of a flag system or pin a floor or
I
something.
can see his hand, so I don't see any
So
gesturing.
first night with the technology, so I will move to ARPA.
Just one quick point. I think we all read the news and see the rise of breakthrough cases and COVID cases. The Commonwealth received a large increase compared to our baseline in the last several months. No new cases in Holliston, I presume. It's something I guess we all have to be vigilant of. So I just wanted to announce that I'm not willing to move on from COVID completely. We still see some looming concerns related to increased caseloads and where it might be going. So we'll keep an eye on it. I know you and I had a conversation this week about the emergency order and whatever practical effect it might have should things go south again. But with you in charge, I feel comfortable keeping an eye on it. So thanks, Chief.
Yeah, I mean, there are some communities that are having a larger surge. Obviously, one new case for us after a month of no cases seemed like a lot, but compared to some other communities who have had to reinstitute mask orders, we're doing very, very well. And the American Academy of Pediatrics has recently come out with suggestions that school-age children over age 2 should be masking. DPH and DESE are not prepared to issue guidance for back to school this fall yet. They're taking a wait and see approach. So although we've got some national guidelines that are suggesting one thing, what it's going to look like here in the Commonwealth, because of course AOP has constituents across the country, but there are certain areas of the country, like the Northeast, where our vaccination levels are much higher, both for staff as well as a large percentage of the school-age population. So I'm not thinking that that will automatically be implemented in the Commonwealth, but we continue to monitor.
Of the cases that are reported statewide, do you have this data on what percentage of those cases are among the unvaccinated? I know some states, I've heard in the news at least casually, that the data is available in some states. Is that available?
I haven't heard a number. I have heard a trend. So the last DPH conference call indicated that a number of the new cases are among the unvaccinated. So they didn't quantify it, but they did acknowledge that it is a percentage that they are tracking. So I'm not sure if they've released that number publicly, but I certainly can dig into that for you.
No, it'll come out in time, I'm sure.
Right.
Okay, all right, thank you. So we're ready for the ARPA programmatic updated.
Yes, so as was previously mentioned, the ARPA steering group has already had their first organizational meeting. They have another meeting coming up next week. And one of the things that we wanted to make sure that we had codified before we start to receive applications is really the roadmap and the process. And so this flowchart has gone through multiple iterations, but we're pretty confident that this is the current interim final flowchart for the ARPA request process here in Holliston. And again, it depends on whether it's a board or a committee, or it's an organization from the community as to whether or not they would need a vote of a board or committee. Obviously, if it's a nonprofit in our community, that doesn't apply to them. But just as we did with CARES, if it's a board, an independent board or committee, I know that your board is going to want to see a vote affirming the concept that they're looking for in the request before it gets approval, and then it will come through the process. And as part of the ARPA steering group's due diligence, they'll obviously be looking, first of all, did it check one of the necessary boxes such that we believe that it would be consistent with Treasury guidance. But then beyond that, are there other funding sources? Because if there are other funding sources, we want to try and stretch these federal dollars as far as we can over the next few years. If they have the opportunity to apply for those other funding sources, they may be put in sort of a holding pattern and encouraged, for instance, and this isn't, I don't want to pigeonhole anybody, but perhaps have you considered CPC funding for this? And so they can go and talk to CPC and go through their process and either have possibly a funding recommendation to town meeting or be told by CPC, it's really outside of our wheelhouse, go back to the ARPA folks. So there's the possibility for them to pursue it elsewhere. And then obviously there's going to be some prioritization and some phasing, because the money will come in from the federal government through the state in tranches. And so there may be some requests that come in that aren't as time sensitive that can be shelved and held until for a future funding cycle, while some other ones that may be more time sensitive or may need more lead time for a bid process and a contract to be issued may be front-loaded and done earlier in the process. And then of course there's the opportunity that the steering group may get a request and may reject it as well, which is a possibility depending on how many requests come in and the scope of them as well.
Okay. This is a pretty formal flow chart, so I think you're going to get some questions from the board. So I'll turn to John first.
So I've already seen this and gave Travis my feedback, but as Chief was talking, there's a part in here, this is more of a question for Travis to see if he thinks this is relevant. So we got our NEU slice already.
Yes.
We have not gotten the extinct Middlesex County portion yet. No idea when that's coming in, by the way. What I hear from ANF, that's still out there. So all in all, I think Holliston was looking at 4 million. Is that about right?
4.3.
4.3, all in, right? For both tranches.
Correct.
So we don't have all the money right now. When we have half, maybe months away. As requests come in, they go to the board of committee says yes. So say it's, select board wants $1 million for a mile of pipe. If the ARPA steering group parks it, not defers it, but parks it because that's a big ask and they want to see what the rest of it looks like. Time goes by, and I'm just wondering, as the applicants send in their requests, is it the steering group's responsibility to go back to the requester and say, Madam Chairwoman, just FYI, your request is good, but we're gonna kind of pulse this. Maybe we'll look at, do you have a contract ready? Has it been bid? When do you expect to incur the expense? And do a little bit of that. A lot of that's your work, Travis, but I just want to find out, is there a place for the steering group to let the requester know the status of their request if it's not moving right away? I'm not talking about the deferrals. These are the ones that are too big, maybe don't score as high, and so forth.
So the application process, which is here under submit and can be linked, although I believe from last time, if I click this, it's not gonna pop up on the screen here and pops up on my screen and I have to change the, which I can if people wanna see the request form. So first of all, I would say that within the request form, there is those categories that the chief was mentioning, which is if you're questioning whether or not your request is gonna be applicable, make sure it checks one of those boxes, just go right into the application. What the application is gonna do is give us all of the feedback together through that. So could we have a back-end version that is viewable to the applicant to say where you are in the process and then various check-in points in time as we move forward? I think that's probably the most efficient way to let people know and have a time for us to be able to make sure we're checking back in with people, see if there's any new information from them, see if there's any new information from the ARPA steering group. That would be my thought.
And this is not a new feedback loop quagmire. TAC dealt with this as well. There were times where a flurry of requests came in, and then it was the responsibility of staff to get back to those applicants and let them know, we heard you, we've got a line, we haven't forgotten about you, or, we heard from you, we also heard from some of your neighbors,
Right.
Would you like to consolidate? And so, I think we figured out in previous iterations of other municipal initiatives to make sure that we're giving that feedback but it's good to make sure that it's on the front end so that we can baseline expectations when we follow up with groups, committees, organizations.
And now speaking for myself, because I'm on the group, when the requests come in, I will not be looking to blow through the money as fast as I can. That's not the goal. The goal is to optimize the space and the types of projects that can be done during the grant period to the benefit of Holliston. So that'll come in a number of different ways, but it's not a first in, first out solution. There's a process of value consideration and so forth. So thank you.
And excuse me, but Travis, you had mentioned that the August 2nd deadline for these requests was just for this particular initial period. It's not a final, for all of ARPA funds allocation, there'll be other additional opportunities for people to submit requests.
Right, and I think the other thing to point out, just to John's original question, I think the ARPA steering group's intention is to review the applicants that come in at a public meeting, not again for open meeting law reasons, but just for transparency reasons. And so, anybody who has that request and gets you're in the parking lot or in deferral section at the moment, I think any of those people's, natural requests would be, can you follow up with me when anything changes? And so we absolutely need to have that process in place. This is the form that I mentioned, by the way. So and I think, Chief, if you're prepared and we want to post it out there, I think the idea would be that Chief and I could just do a Q&A. I don't think diving into every particular request and saying, is this applicable or not is the intent. It would be more probably to walk through this form, how to fill it out, So we do need the name, email, and then the representing group that you're a part of. It doesn't have to be for the town, it can be for an organization. You have to name your project, description and justification, cost estimate for 5 years, and then also for this coming fiscal year. If they don't match, obviously, there will be questions that people will be asking from the steering group, but also the ability to indicate if you know the spending timeline. You must check at least one of these boxes to make it ARPA eligible. I think some of the feedback we got from the ARPA steering group was certainly it's helpful if it hits more than one box, but it's also it's the scope, or it's how great of an impact you're having to the community. So even if it checks one box, but is a significant impact, it might not be simply the more boxes you check, the more credit you get. We are going for, the biggest impact. And then there's some specific capital project related questions. Is it part of an existing strategic plan? As the comprehensive long range plan committee kicked off last week and indicated there are quite a few of those. So that would be helpful for the group to know if it's part of an existing plan that hasn't been able to happen previously. So this is the form. And again, the idea right now would be Chief and I to be available to anybody. We were going to post a time next Tuesday. We're looking for the best time to do that, where we would run through this, and then if somebody couldn't watch it, we would record it and have it available on the website for somebody to look back on. Again, probably if the answer is that a request matches one of these things, then some of the criteria, then the chief and I would essentially say, yes, you should request it, because how else is the ARPA steering group going to consider it?
Can you let folks know at home who can apply for an ARPA grant?
Okay, would you were thinking?
You want to take a stab at it?
Sure.
So it's a unit of government, nonprofits.
Correct.
Not individuals.
No.
Businesses.
Businesses would be eligible for some of the initiatives, yes, absolutely.
I think some of the ones that I've seen out there, quite honestly, are sort of consortiums around businesses, right? So chambers of commerce, those types of things that are trying to impact economic development initiatives to thrive coming out of COVID.
But if you
I think-
operate a restaurant, you lost X revenue, can you apply?
You can, and again, just like, I'll use the TAC example again. If we get 4 applications from one specific street that are all mentioning a theme, we may go to those applicants for ARPA that were individual businesses and suggest that they collaborate and sort of have an overarching project as opposed to all one-offs. Because there may be others from the community that could benefit from that sort of initiative, and they may be looking too narrow, and we think it's a great idea, but that a lot of other businesses might benefit as well.
Right, and to Tina, you may remember one of the things we got creative on CARES was we made this nonprofit available relief through Youth and Family Services and the Holliston.
Community Action Fund.
Thank you. So we get creative, but I just want to let people knowing at home sort of what gets you in the door, who gets you in there, how to get in the door.
Being an individual would not be making an application as an individual. There are other programs that we may be able to point
Yeah, I
someone
was just gonna say, yeah.
And again, if there's that need, we've got great networks, and again, Youth and Family Services prepared a great service overview, which can help direct individuals who may still feel that they need help recovering from the impact of the pandemic.
Ben, can I jump in at the thought before I forget it?
Go ahead.
So there are obviously some very knowledgeable individuals on the steering group who have been through the CARES funding process, who are well aware of how the town has been impacted and where the needs are. If you don't get, and I'm thinking about the common victualler's license. So if you remember last year, we halved it, it was 50%. So that request, where would that come from? If it didn't come forward from something like Holliston Together through HCAT, would the steering group also make a recommendation for ARPA funding to perhaps offer another round of relief on that license? So my question is, can the steering group itself make a request? You guys have a tremendous amount of knowledge. You know how the town has been impacted. If you don't see the need coming from another government entity or from a nonprofit, would you make your own request?
We have the capacity to do that through the way the process sits right now. But the question is, who would be the champion of it to implement it? So if it, the example you gave specifically would be very easy. The board would just notify license holders that we're offering this relief to you. But if it's something that has a more involved rollout, then in order for it to have success, if the board were to vote for that funding, we would want to make sure that we had a champion that could implement it.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that was the idea when we created the steering committee, that we would, as members, talk back to our constituents, right? Schools would talk to their constituents and so forth, so.
And that's why we have the representation on the steering committee the way we've had it.
Right, so in your example, I'd come back
right,
and I'd say, I think we should consider the following as an application to ARPA, that kind of thing.
And we're also keeping our ear to the ground and networking with our professional networks, so that if we hear about a community, even if it's halfway across the country that's doing something really innovative, we can bring it back and say, hey, what do you think of this? Do you think it would work in our community? And then we just need to figure out who can we approach to partner with us on that.
Okay.
So yeah, things can bubble up from the steering group, but there's gonna have to be someone who's gonna be able to implement it. Because the way that the steering group has their charge, they're really not, they don't have the capacity to be able to implement programs.
Okay. Ben, I'm sorry to jump ahead.
No, that's
Tom, you
quite
wanna say? Okay, Ben, go ahead.
Just one question I have is, just basically kind of alludes to my comment about the chart that you provided for CARES. Is there a mechanism here, or is it outside of this, for considering like planning for if there is future needs for direct COVID relief for, is there a mechanism in here, or is it sort of outside of the steering group process to, like we need more PPE down the road or something like that?
Sure, so that would be in parallel to this process. Obviously, I right now could put in a placeholder and, fill out the form and say $10,000 for PPE as a contingency. That way it was a stake in the ground and it's on record. But again, the August 2nd deadline is just for this first round, just trying to get people thinking about it, trying to gear up to be able to put some of this money to best use in our community. But we've got this for a while. And so in 6 months, if there's 2 more surges and we're starting to get low on PPE, or we need a specialized type of cleaning equipment or something, obviously departments can come, we can either call a special meeting of the steering group to make a recommendation to then bring to this board, or the steering group early on could seek, in the medical field, I would refer to it as standing orders. And the same thing happened with CARES. You as a board approved certain concepts and certain spending ideas back in June of 2020, before we'd even seen the money come in from DLS. And so we sort of operated off of well, if it was in that original list, as long as we don't exceed that spending, we can continue to make expenditures towards that concept. So it's possible that out of this August 2nd review, or post-August 2nd review, we may just sort of bring to the board for its first round of approvals, just a contingency, a placeholder for cleaning and disinfection, PPE, just so that we don't need to call a special meeting of the steering group if the need comes up, and we can be more reactive rather than have to.
I would be very, I would like to see something like that. It doesn't have to, just to make sure that we're preparing ahead. And we also talked about previously, just thinking about preparing for FEMA, in the event that some of the FEMA money doesn't come in, we have sort of like a little bit of a cushion within ARPA set aside, so we can, we're prepared for that. So, sure. No, that's great. That's all I have. So thank you.
Right, okay. I have 2 quick questions, and I should correct, it's not a steering committee, it was not appointed by the board, it's a steering group, it's an internal working group. The steering group is not voting on any requests. That's the way it looks on the flow sheet. I just want to clarify. You will review and make recommendations, but you're not voting to say yes, this, no, that.
The steering group does not have any spending authority the way the arrangement was created. They would make a recommendation to your board because your board is the fiduciary agent for this federal program.
I think that's important to point out, that it will always be held in an open meeting, public meeting, when these decisions are made.
Correct.
And then the second question I had is, how many requests have you received so far? August 2nd is, not that far away.
I will say that I've had some communications with people who have scheduled some meetings just before August 2nd. So I think people understand. I think they wanted to take time to present to their boards and committees. There are 2 in the queue at the moment. But I've spoken with groups who are aware of it and have meetings coming in the next 10 days.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Do we have anyone on the call who would like to ask a question related to or make a comment related to the ARPA programmatic update? All right, seeing no one, we're going to move on then. Thank you, Chief. To warrants for this evening.
Two sets, same warrant terms? Nope, big part. One is for FY '21 totaling $1,762,391.24. Make a motion to approve that.
I'll second that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Second one is an FY '22 warrant. It totals $1,176,276.10. I'll make a motion to approve that.
I will second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Thank you, John. That moves on now to public comment. John?
They're gonna have to catch up with the signature, stand by.
Do you want me to?
Nope, just a couple of things. Question for Travis regarding TAB. They're underway, they're doing their thing. I think we said it'll be several months while they do their work. Can you give us an update on when we can expect something from them? What is it trending? Is there any kind of scheduling refresher, any feedback at all?
I'm concerned that the report will probably not, based on their timeline, give us enough lead time for the October town meeting. I did ask them for an update. They indicated they work as fast as they work, and they're doing a good job. They did request a couple of more interviews. The IT director was one that was not in their first round. They requested that meeting. So they're still working diligently, from when they initially started, I think 3 months is the time that they give. So June, July, August. I think in September is probably a reasonable time to expect it. And I think, we'll discuss in a moment, it might be tight for for getting ready for the October now fall town meeting. But I think, it's gonna be right there in that time frame.
Okay, thank you. Just a heads up, I have a meeting this Wednesday with Parks and Rec that was rescheduled. I'll report back to the board once we have our conversations about that. And then just an alert through Public Works, getting updates from Sean on a variety of different projects. I'll provide those hopefully next week. But in the meantime, Travis coordinated the posting of photos of the construction of the water treatment plant up off Central Street. They're on the website right now. The foundation is structured, and I don't know if it's being poured yet, but it's definitely underway. Given all the rain, that's impressive. So that's all I have to see. Thank you.
John, where you're going to meet with Sean for updates. I think, Travis, we are looking to get Stantec on the agenda to talk about a sidewalk study. So if that's an update that could come back to the board, that would be great. That, and I think we're also looking for the water main replacement study to
It's
be.
all of the studies,
Yeah, okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay,
as well as other public project status like Mudville and Winter Street. So
okay, great. Thank you. All set?
Yep.
All right, then.
No, I don't have any public comment today.
Okay, I just wanted to say, my only public comment is welcome Jay Robinson. Nice to have you here in the room.
Thank you.
Nice to have a new face.
Yeah.
We are joined tonight by a liaison from the Finance Committee. So it's great to have things starting to open up a little bit more and have more people in the room. And that's all I have for public comment, which is sort of spontaneous. Anybody on the call for public comment this evening?
Or in the room.
Or in the room, Jay?
I have nothing to say.
Okay. All right, well, seeing none, we're gonna move on then to Complete Streets Progress Update. Travis, are you gonna start with that, introduce that?
Absolutely. So a couple of the things that we just mentioned related to the Stantec report. One of the things that's sort of outside of what we as a town initiated through town meeting warrant articles, which are the Stantec reports that were just mentioned, is a complete streets process. Obviously, the person leading point on that has been Sean Reese, the DPW director. But there is a working group, which I don't want to get in front of, but we are quickly approaching the period where they're prepared to talk about a priority plan that they see of specific projects that would go through the complete streets process. So essentially where we are, and what I provided to the board was a timeline from Sean Reese. So I'll just go through that briefly, answer any questions, and I think it's going to end up dovetailing very nicely with what we have initiated through town meeting, which is the Stantec sidewalk study. And so this is the update essentially on the timeline from Sean Reese. So September 1st is the deadline for the Tier 2 submission to DOT. Tier 2 is the town's project prioritization list. That's what the working group needs to essentially finalize, but it is in that stage for them to finalize. The list has been scored and ranked by the consultant, which is Green International. That is a consultant that we've used elsewhere in town and are comfortable with. So that working group is going to get into looking at the priority list, and September 1st is the deadline for that submission. Next is a deadline for the Tier 3 application, which is April 1st. Tier 3 is the funding to implement the project. So the funding is up to $400,000. And really, you know, when it comes to our capital planning, when it comes to sort of being able to look at side by side with the Stantec report and this program, the Complete Streets. Clearly, there'll be multiple things for the town to consider when it comes to complete streets and sidewalks. What becomes the priority first step in the $400,000 Tier 3 aspect of this will be one component of a larger conversation that we'll have also with the sidewalk study. Complete streets can include sidewalks as well as some other components. So that's where we are with that. The one thing I would add for anybody sort of interested in the Complete Streets program, which you can also obviously look online, the $400,000 amount, which is the one, you know, that would be a sizable chunk as it relates to our capital improvement program, is available every 3 to 4 fiscal years. So this would be our first real crack at Complete Streets when it comes to sizable amounts of funding. But this is something that the town is sort of going through now, but would be part of our 5-year CIP that we would hit multiple times within the next 5 years.
Okay. So I've got a couple comments to make about this. John and Ben, I'm not sure if you had a chance to look over the draft prioritization list. While you guys are doing that, I just want to start by saying, you know, Complete Streets has identified 58 projects, so a significant number of projects within the community. And I want to be clear that the state funding through the Complete Streets program, Tier 3, won't cover all of this. It will cover a fraction of this. It's $400,000, and many of these projects exceed that, and in total they exceed it as well. So, you know, I just want to go out and say clearly that I think we're going to need to get projects from the Complete Streets list onto the town meeting warrants for town meeting approval. I think the sidewalk study is going to complement that. There are 23 projects in this Complete Street priority list that relate to Washington Street, which is state-owned. We're going to need to have state involvement, and to that end, we have a call with the state rep this week to discuss how to move forward with engaging Mass DOT to have the state-owned sections addressed. Again, there are 23 projects on the list that are on state-owned roads. There was a crash this weekend on Saturday that involved a crosswalk, and there are crosswalks that are identified on this prioritization plan as well. In fact, the section of roadway where the crosswalk from the crash this weekend is involved is on the list here, identified as a new possible sidewalk. So the working group needs to meet. When it does, Sean has said that he's planning a meeting and looking forward to an update to get the work going. But the working group will make a recommendation back to the select board to prepare an application for tier 3.
What does that do?
It is due October 1st, so it's gonna come quickly. I know that Sean had the Stan Tech consultants reading over the complete, so Green International did complete streets for Holliston and Stan Tech did the sidewalk study. I know they were in communication. And so there is some nice overlap and coordination of information there. But again, the tier 3 application needs to be submitted by October 1st. So as I envision it, the working group will report back to the select board with a recommendation for the projects that will go into the tier 3 application.
Yes, any application at this level would be signed off on by the CEO of the town, which is the chair of the select.
Okay, so we'll have that in the discussion here. So as soon as Sean's ready to hold that working group meeting, I think we're gonna be good to go. Parallel to that is the Stan Tech study. I think that, John, drives, and Ben, I think that drives 3 separate decisions. One is approaching Mass DOT about getting a project on their state-owned sections. Again, there's a tremendous amount of overlap between complete streets and the draft Stan Tech study that we've seen related to state-owned highways. So for sure, Mass DOT needs to be involved with Holliston to address those areas. That's one avenue. Another avenue is a grant application. So that's something that we'll talk with the state rep about this week, what's available for Holliston. A third, again, as I mentioned before, would be getting something on the town meeting warrant. And that needs to go through the capital improvement plan, is that correct?
Yes,
Yeah.
so there is, there in the 5-year CIP that was published, and is available on the website, there's placeholders there for all 5 fiscal years with reference to the fact that we are waiting for the Stan Tech report.
So for sure, I guess what I come back to is that both the complete streets priority list and the Stan Tech study identify significant needs, and this board has work to do to identify funding sources for the project. So any thoughts? Yeah.
I just need some clarity on the spreadsheet. It indicates a total estimated project cost and then a complete streets funding request. So taking the first item, for example, if the total project cost is $132,867, we would allot $48,276 as a complete streets funding, correct?
That's as I understand it.
Where would the balance come from?
We need to have our working group. We're waiting for an update. We have not had that conversation yet. So that's the last step to this process.
So if we were to approve, say, numbers, I don't know, 1 through 3 or 4, and that ate up the 400,000, nothing would happen until the next phase, is that correct? Or until we identify further funding?
What's not clear to me, John, is if that, so in example number 1 there, $48,000 of the total 132, what's not clear to me is that a portion of, you see under the project description, there are
Yep.
items. I'm not sure if that 48,000 is one particular item out of that project description. It's not clear to me yet how that works. We haven't had that update from Green International.
Right. The consultant has gotten to this point. They need a final conversation with the working group, and then I would say that we would put them in front of the select board to present where they are.
Is it, I guess I'm just curious to find out if we have $400,000 in an application
Mhm.
and we apply partial funding to some of these projects, it just seems like we won't get the project done until we resolve the missing link versus looking at 1 or 2 projects that total the total amount and assign the total value of that to those particular projects to get them done.
And I think what they need to present to the group so that they can finalize the prioritization is if the methodology is right, similar to any of these other programs that we have where, you know, certain things are covered through complete streets. And if you want to address something that isn't covered under complete streets, the town is on the hook for that other part and needs to have the funding source to go with it, to match essentially.
There is no match though, right?
I mean, based on the way that I'm reading this, I think given a specific project, it's unclear that if they're not gonna cover the full amount, then that might be what the group needs to prioritize.
So where I think clarity is needed is, so it's my understanding from Green International's last meeting with us is that engineering costs and design costs were covered under Complete Streets tier 3, excuse me. That, I mean, that makes that would be the obvious explanation, is that the difference is engineering costs, but that doesn't make sense to me because tier 3 covers that. So I don't know. There is no match to my knowledge, no match requirement for the town of Holliston.
Not the way I read Complete Streets.
So we need clarity on that.
And the final piece, you know, as you all know, we're waiting for the Stantec report. We've referenced that. It would be ideal to take whatever the board decides to be the most efficient use of the 400,000 and assign it in the direction of what the Stantec report says as well. Complement both pieces as a coordinated capital improvement project.
And that's where it gets really interesting. Yes, I agree.
That makes sense. Yeah, I would imagine our friends in the finance committee will be looking to ask that question too. You usually take a grant and complement it with your internal resources to achieve something. So how do we do that?
So where I see that getting interesting, John, is when you look at both the Stantec draft report and the Complete Streets, something like Norfolk Street is identified as a new sidewalk. That is not on the Stantec list of key areas, high priority, because the way they did their report is they identified areas that were in close proximity to the rail trail, to parks and recreation sites. So Norfolk, yes, but not the entire stretch of Norfolk, to schools, to the rail trail downtown. So that's where that's where there's some decision making to be done, because one could argue that having a sidewalk come from Central Street all the way out to Potoma or to Stoddard or further down to the area where the gas station is there in Norfolk makes a lot of sense. You're connecting a community. But when you come to the Stantec report, they're only recommending it as a new sidewalk. They're not saying we've identified this as a high priority. However, it's in the Complete Streets document. So that's where it gets to be a little more interesting. I will point this out about the Complete Streets report, or list rather, that has community input. So they had a Wikimaps piece to this early on, and there were 160 unique comments that came in from the public. So those were incorporated into this draft list. That was not my understanding, is Stantec did not do any sort of community survey.
No, the intention of the Stantec was mostly to take an inventory.
Right. The way I'm viewing this is that the Complete Streets really provides new access.
Can I just put one? So
Yeah.
I think we're talking about the Stantec as if it's final, but I think we
Yeah,
referenced
it's
earlier that
draft,
it's not, right? They have come to and been given some feedback, which is also that the town is looking for recommendations from Stantec. So that is not final yet, but you know, it will, similar to, we would want to know what their recommendations are to time something, and there might be overlap with Complete Streets, but the only point that I would make to will they dovetail perfectly is that the Complete Street scope is not the same as the Stantec scope, which is, you know, inventory and give us condition analysis of our sidewalk, but then also give us, you know, ways to improve connectivity, and then sort of give us your professional expertise on.
But their methodology does not address connectivity and increased access. Their methodology is specific to conditions and inventory, right?
This is true.
What's the total amount of these 58? Do you have that? It's not summed on a sheet. I didn't know if you happen to know it.
They gave it to me in a PDF because it's draft right now. I don't have it in
Okay.
Excel, but I could add them up.
It's significant because you have a couple 5 million.
Yeah, don't-
2 million.
Don't have it up, Travis. That's
Yeah.
fine.
No sticker shock.
Johnny, do you have any more questions? Are you?
Just note that there are a couple of projects that have no values associated with them, so it is, but I'm done.
So, you know, forgive me if this is sort of asking the naive question, but how do these projects get on here? How do we figure out these 58 projects?
So here we have a similarity between the two processes, the two studies. In this case, the similarity is this windshield, I would say around windscreen windshield survey.
Okay.
So they drive around the community and they look to see, they do their, in this case, Green International doing the tier 2 work here, they did it their
So
own.
Green is the one who identified these
Yeah, right.
locations.
Well, they had a couple different ways. They had the working group input.
Okay,
They had community input through wiki mapping, and I would say that was the biggest.
Yeah.
And then they did their own windshield windshield survey. Windshield survey.
Yeah, windshield time. It's a big deal. So my other thought about a couple things. So these are all, as I understand, it looks like mostly pedestrian access, and so it'll be mostly sidewalks and potentially like crosswalks and things like that. Is that kind of reasonable?
It's pedestrian, it's bicycle, so people who walk,
Bike lanes and things like that too.
people who bike,
Yep.
but also people who use public transportation. So you will see in here public
Oh, yeah,
transportation.
yeah, okay.
Where there's,
No, that's okay.
where there's another similarity between the two is both studies look at safe routes to school.
Yeah.
Both studies place a high emphasis on access to the rail trail.
Yes, absolutely. So I guess one thing I have, is thinking about, as we get these other studies, these Stantec studies, is that we'd want to make sure we're trying to make these projects work in tandem as much as possible, because, you'd hate to see, like, I'm making it up, but we do, a nice crosswalk on Woodland Street and then we repave it the next year and completely, it's gone. We want to make sure that any of these improvements, I think we need that big picture, those thinking about all these different projects together, so that way we're not, we're maximizing our efforts, so that way if we're doing, something on Hollis Street, we're fixing the sidewalks, we can maybe do more things at once and try to, get more bang for the buck, if you will.
Well, when you say that, Ben, you now have me thinking, because that was one of the goals with the water main study, was to have these two come in at the same time, so we could kind of do that planning.
Right.
So I'm, I guess the sooner we can get those two on the agenda before that October 1 deadline for completion, because they are interconnected.
Yeah, we
You
need
wouldn't
to
want to
have
pull
them all.
something off this
Yeah.
list.
Does Stantec have this?
Yes.
Yeah, they've been working on it.
Sean set up a call directly with Green International and Stantec to go over this. It was, again, it's not final, but this is all in the prep work for both reports, so. Hopefully, I would say at the very least, the ideal would be that two together identify some low-hanging fruit for the town, I think, and if there's clearly examples that this board's comfortable with, then, hopefully that would put us on a path to have a conversation leading into October.
The most sensible approach to me, and this is just me speaking, is take the $400,000, apply it to projects that the $400,000 can complete based on priority levels. And then use the rest of the data to overlap, if you will, with the Stantec project and eke out even more if we can from that product, so that it accomplishes all the goals that are, I think, are within both scopes.
Would we have to do something similar to another funding application in several years? Do we have to go through this process again, or will we be using the same prioritization for the next 3 or 4 years?
I believe since this is the first time through a lot of this work, but all of it would have to be refreshed on any changes that we make, and then, new condition and those types of things.
Will you ask Sean to get us clarity for the difference between the total estimated project
Yes.
cost and the complete streets funding requested?
Absolutely.
Just one comment about the tier 3 application. So I've attended workshops on this, and you do have to have a competitive application. So it has to make sense. And so, I know the strongest applications are the ones that have a mix of public transit, addressing access to schools, addressing, the bigger the mix of project types. So you're reaching as many vulnerable and road users as possible. Those are the strongest applications. I think we have plenty here. I think we stand in a very good position to get an approved.
I think as we've discussed, there's more to come. I think, it's when Stantec and all these groups are ready to have their final reports is really when we're gonna wanna make sure we're pushing out, make sure that we have an audience and people are getting all that information. We'll get it out of the website. And we are approaching that time in which these reports will be finalized.
Okay, so we're waiting then on this update on Stantec for both sidewalk and water main. We are waiting for the working group to meet, and we are looking for clarity on the difference between the cost columns here.
Yes.
Okay, all right.
I'll have them make sure we get that before the working group meets. So
Yeah, I
that
think
they have
that would
that
be
available.
helpful, yeah. Okay. Any other comments on this?
Thank you.
Anything from the Zoom call? Okay, so we're gonna move on then back to Travis for the remainder of the comments from the town administrator.
All right, I'm just gonna pull up our wonderful website for the majority of these, for people to know how to get this information. So many of the requests we get, the information has been put up online. So for the first one, it was referenced earlier by Mr. Cronin in his update, the town project updates, which is under town links. You go there, and you can go down to today's update on the water treatment plant, well number 5. Ground has been broken. There is some foundation work being done. This one is sideways for some reason. I think we can fix that, but this one is the right way. And so that's where we've been putting information for people following along with that project. One other one that I'll mention under town links, procurement and legal notices. We have a couple things go out there. We did extend the deadline on 2, which is the town hall septic program. That RFP is now due the 30th. And the DPW feasibility study, we changed the procurement based on feedback from some vendors, and that now closes on the 23rd, which I believe is this Friday. And lastly, I'll go to the main page again, and if you scroll down, you will see the much discussed and heavily utilized survey for 260 Woodland. Help decide what happens to 260 Woodland. We have 560 responses as of today. And it is open through July 23rd. And I believe in discussing with the Holliston reporter, they will have one last push to make sure people are aware of that. But obviously, all the methods we've used to get that out have been effective. In that 560 is a number that competes well with all of the surveys that we've done in the past. One last thing for the website will be as I mentioned, the long range planning committee, which was created at the May annual town meeting, has its own page, lists all the members down there, and had its first meeting on July 14th. The next meeting is going to be scheduled for Wednesday, August 4th at 7:30 p.m. There is no chair at the moment, so I will continue to chair it, although I believe they discussed that this next meeting, they intend to appoint a chair, and they did have a quick conversation with the petitioner of the article that created the long range planning group, and so I believe that they should be off and running based on that meeting.
There's one exciting update, isn't there? They're no longer a committee of 17.
I don't believe that the action they take technically can cut them down to a group of 16. There was not a heavy interest in seating the 17th Department of Public Works, but because the article created 17, the quorum when the group meets as in total will still need to be 9, which is difficult. Is a large number of people, but they did have great participation in the first meeting and already have indicated a quorum for Wednesday, August 4th at 7:30.
Okay.
Sorry, was there another question?
There was not.
Okay, and that's all I have on the web page. Last announcement, the EDC has its full slate now. The town administrator appoints to the EDC. We had one applicant for the final seat, which is Pat Hafford. Based on the qualifications, I put him in touch with EDC. He's attended the last couple meetings. They're very happy to have him, and he received his appointment letter. So by their August meeting, Pat Hafford will complete the 7-member EDC. The planning board will continue to have Dave Thorne as their rep to the EDC. So the EDC is full, which is great. And I just announcement, if anybody's looking for me, I'll be taking this Wednesday through Friday off, but obviously you can go through my office if you need anything.
Building your arc.
Building the arc, yes, been reading a lot. And that's it.
Thank you. Any questions for the town administrator? Nope. Anyone on the Zoom call or in the room? Okay, so we're gonna move on then to board business. So we have a couple appointments and contract for AP Associates and some minutes. So John, I think you have all that in the folder there.
Motion for the appointment, Travis, or is it just simply to make a motion to accept Pooja Gupta to the council?
Yes, the terms are written here on the agenda as well. The Cultural Council and the Concom have separate terms which are indicated on the agenda.
So I'll make a motion to appoint Pooja Gupta, 105 Overlook Drive, to a 2-year appointment on the Cultural Council.
For that motion?
All in favor? Aye.
And I'll make a motion to appoint Richard Shansky as an alternate member of the Conservation Commission. That's a 1-year term.
I will second that motion with a thank you very much for volunteering.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, and we have Richard on the call. Rich, you have hung in there since 6:30. Even when we stepped out, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us why you're interested, why you stepped forward for the Conservation Commission?
Yes, I'd be happy to, and thank you very much for the time with the select board. I've been a resident of Holliston for over 25 years. I've served on the Holliston Conservation Associates. I'm a scientist, a biochemist by training, and I'm very interested in conservation issues. I also am a hiker, camper, backpacker as well. And I look forward to serving the community.
Rick, really want to thank you for volunteering, and I imagine the Conservation Commission's meetings are much shorter than this, so you may have
Not always.
the heaviest lift tonight, maybe not, but thank you again. It was great to see you on the call tonight. Thanks for introducing yourself.
It's my pleasure. I actually went to my first Conservation Commission meeting the other night, and I must say that Ryan has been very helpful, as has Chris, and I'm excited to get started.
Okay.
Ryan is very excited about this.
Nice to see you. Nice to meet you. Thank you. Okay,
Thank you very much.
so we have an update on the Mudville project as well, or a contract rather.
I'm sorry, we had to vote on Mr. Shansky.
We did, all in
Okay,
favor,
all right.
yes, that carried.
Apologize, I missed that. And I'll just take this opportunity on the Mudville project to just explain I know people were looking for an update. The equipment has been mobilized. You will see some of that mobilization at the lot behind the fire station on Central. There is a plan to try to keep it to one side, working with obviously a lot that has a brook on one side of it, but at the same point, that is for working in that area was determined to be the best way to have that equipment situated, trying to work with the neighbors in the area as well, and that it's probably scheduled to break ground most likely August 1st. So we're about 10 days away, and the mobilization people will start to see in that area.
So I'll make a motion to approve the construction phase of services contract in the Mudville neighborhood, as Travis just mentioned, in the amount of $218,400. This project includes $113,700 for construction administration, $90,000 for construction monitoring, and $14,700 for post-construction.
We have a motion, do we have a second?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Minutes.
And the meeting minutes of June 21st, 2021. I'll make a motion to approve those.
I will second that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
And I think the last item here is a donation to Parks and Recreation for $2,800 from the newcomers.
This is a donation from the Holliston newcomers and neighbors. The purpose of the gift, the donation is for summer concerts at Goodwill Park. The amount received is $2,800 for account number 21462-53000. That is the Parks and Recreation gift account. Motion to accept this gift.
I'll second it with a thank you.
All in favor?
Aye.
Great. All right, that concludes board business. So we're going to move on to other business. John, do you have any other business for tonight?
I am good, thank you.
Okay, Ben, any other business?
I have no other business, thank you.
Okay, I just have one, and I could have done it earlier under public comment, I'll do it now. We should have been, a while ago, you had asked for a report from the Traffic Advisory Committee that showed usage of the equipment that was purchased through town meeting warrant articles and updates on, there was another request in there, I'm gonna say signage, but that update should be coming. It'll either be on our agenda next week or the first week in August.
Okay, thank you very much.
That's all I have. So with that said, unless anybody else has business they'd like the board to address, we're gonna go ahead and close the meeting. So make a motion to entertain rather. All right, let me just do a little.
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Good night, Holliston. Thank you, and we will see you next week.